structured synergy, that's the title of this conference. And some people might expect of today that I will give kind of overview of the developments in structural synergy or structural engineering in the world. That's not what I will do, because you will see during the poster presentation, and you already got a lot of PhD presentations, these are the experts, and they are working on the challenges for the future. But what I would like to address during my talk is today we actually focus on integration, on synergy. These are all kinds of beautiful buzzwords. But how do you do that in practice? And what does that mean? And this is an example of a 3TU happening, where 3 universities are cooperating, different disciplines are cooperating. But we also try to engage practice and engage the industry, because that's the idea that we are much more industry-driven than just being in the ivory tower of the university. But how do you do that in practice? Nice words, but how do you do that? So that's why that was the subtitle of my talk, all easier said than done. So this is a slide that probably all of you know. Actually, most of you probably will already say, we are already in that future situation. We focus already on total life cycle cost, on value for money. It's about different stakeholders, different interests, different performance criteria in the whole life cycle. It's about risk and cost management, and of course, the integrated value chain. Probably in many of your presentations, you address these things, because that's the future, or today of the future. But you come from a long way, and if you look at practice, we are still on the left side of the slide. People say that in nice policy documents, and if you talk to industry people, they will all say, no, we are integrated. We actually supply that total integrated value chain. That's what we do as in practice. But if you really look in different projects, we are still on the left side. What does that mean for the clients? And as I said, the 3TU Center, but all the activities nowadays at universities, and I think if you look at the policy documents of the 3 technical universities, you will see, let's be industry-driven, let's be societal-driven, let's be client-driven. Actually, if you look now at the top sectorenbeleid that we have here in the Netherlands, but also Horizon 2020, if you look at the documents, it's all about what does society need, what does industry need, and actually how can we support the economic development with our research. But clients are asking for flexibility, not standard-made solutions. They ask for efficiency. Sustainability is such an issue. Well, you can read it, but actually all the clients, they want to be efficient, but at the same time, every client asks for something different, tailor-made. But again, integration. And if you look at the public clients, it's all about legitimacy, transparency, and so on. So this is actually what clients want. What does that mean for our research? And also for the focus, if you look then at structured synergy and structural issues and civil engineering in general. It's about creating innovative products, finding integration solutions, and processes. That's probably all clear for you. That's not new. That's nice, and we all strive for that. And I think if you look at the websites of firms, industries, and again universities, you will see these kind of buzzwords. But to give you only one example how difficult that is that if you look at today, one of the big programs in Europe, but also in the Netherlands, all of the world actually, when I was at Stanford, that was exactly the same topics. We all talk about climate change and this whole debate. Actually, we expect, the policymakers expect, that scientists will come with solutions, with answers. But I think if we would ask you, what do you expect from climate change? There will be a debate, right? So we don't have one solution. But anyway, we see that climate change, and if you call it climate change or global warming or whatever, what we do see is we get changes. And what you now already see in infrastructure, in civil structures, if it's rail or roads, we see that we have a big impact. Scoring of railway bridges, for instance, these are happenings in Eastern Europe and Southern Europe, floods. I was in a beautiful climate last year, only sun. But if you look at, we had a couple of days in San Francisco with a lot of rainfall. And suddenly the whole economic situation, everything was on hold, right? So because the infrastructure in the US, we talk a lot and we often as university, we compare ourselves with the Anglo-Saxon world. But many of you have been in the US. If you look at the state and the quality of the roads and also rates, it's very bad. So once we get this is tremendous. But anyway, nowadays also in our own country, we have this because one of the effects of climate change is that we have sudden raindrops and rainfall, and that's very hard to predict. And how do you manage that? We also have the other way. It's not only rain, it's not only snow, etc. But the global warming actually creates problems for our infrastructure. And we are used to think about rainfall, snowfall, winter issues, but that's changing. We get more and more problems in the summer. For instance, buckling of railroads or deterioration of our roads. So it's shifting from the winter to summer. And if you look at climate change, and one of the studies that I'm involved in is about the impact of climate change on the assets of infrastructure, you see these kind of modules. So if you look at the different scenarios, these are different scenarios from the Dutch Royal Institute of Weather Forecast, the KNMI. And if you look at these and you try to understand what could happen with roads and rail, is that if you look at the rail infrastructure, these are the kind of incidents that you expect during the winter. So we will see a decline of incidents. But if you look at the summer, it will be exactly the other way around. So these kind of issues have a big impact for structural engineers, but also for policymakers, for asset managers, and for society. So if you look at structured synergy and structured integration, what's then the solution? The solution is partly the structure, and all of you, or most of you, are experts in this field. But the solution on structures have an impact on construction and the maintenance. We have to look on the long-term impact of it. I think if we would have this conference 10 years ago, everybody would talk about SOAP and that kind of asphalt. With rainfall, we have a problem with that. So we have to understand what kind of impacts does that have for our long-term maintenance of our assets. But it also has an impact on traffic, and traffic has an impact on our assets. So understanding the integration, the cycle is very important. We can't do that on our own. We have to work multidisciplinary, we have to work with practice, we have to understand that, and solutions are becoming very difficult. And that's also a challenge not only for research, but also for universities. What do you train? Do you train people to be integrated, or do you train for specialists? And actually, you can't integrate if you're not a specialist. You have to understand the material engineering, you have to understand the structural engineering. That's very important. At the same time, you also have to be able to understand the other people, to understand the language. And it's not just bringing a project together and team together, it's really trying to understand each other. And that's a very big challenge. Also one of the challenges of the Twente University Center. We have different disciplines. If you look at civil engineering, we have actually all these issues. We have traffic modelers, we have structural engineers, we have construction managers, we have maintenance people. They're all part of the Twente University Center of Construction, Twente Psibouw. But how do you integrate? It's a challenge. And it's not new. Many of you have been trained, and probably this is part of the first of your bachelor degree, that at least you start with the origins of construction and civil engineering, and you talk about Vitruvius, about firmness, utilitas, and venustas. Actually, firmness, beauty, aesthetics, and functionality. Already at that time, Romans, and before that Greek, and before that whatever culture, were talking about these issues. It's not totally new. But you're still finding a challenge. So worldwide, what's now, you can talk about that, but you all are confronted with limited public budgets. The world is becoming very competitive. You get a more and more international audience, international group of people. It's an international competition, but also individualization. And the challenge also at universities, we try to educate people. We actually also try to stimulate people to work in projects and to integrate. But to get a tenure position at university worldwide, you have to become a specialist. You need your own profile. So the way we are organized is actually not stimulating the integration. We train people to become the high expert in his or her own field. And that's a challenge. So how do you integrate that? If you look at practice, but also more and more in research programs, so university organized in tenure tracks, individualization, but if you look at how we do research projects and also how we work in practice, is that different organizations are working together in project teams and individuals from different organizations are working together. Sometimes even in projects, and especially the people in industry, I don't have to explain that, but you don't often don't know in your project who is who from which firm, because you have to cooperate. Yeah? This is a challenge also for universities. How do you do that? Because here you could say this is Delft, this is Eindhoven, this is Twente, and perhaps another international university. But if you look at how you win projects in the EU, but also in the Netherlands, it's actually much more this model. And sometimes you compete with your colleague who's next door, but you cooperate with someone at the other university. I think I have more cooperation with colleagues from Delft and Eindhoven than within my own university. It's strange, isn't it? But that's how today's society, research society is working. And often you get these kind of battles, right? This is what happened in our universities. So how do you create structured synergy? I think that's a basic challenge, and I really believe in what I call co-production of knowledge. It's also one of these buzzwords. Engaged scholarship, working together between practice and science, but also between different disciplines. Sometimes people say that it's engaged scholarship. Engaging people all the time is very important. I think this happening is all about that, bringing people together, but also try to engage each other. And just 2 stories. And if you look at engaged scholarship, this is from a guy who's called Van der Van. He's has Dutch origins, but he's nowadays an American. He works in different universities in America. But when you look actually where we started with most of our research, it's informed. And that's still how many research institutes are organized. We work in our labs, we work in our building, and we think we get a demand from the industry. We do our tests, and after half a year, sometimes even after 4 years, we come with a report and say, look, this is a solution. But that's not what practice wants. That's actually, practice is much more interested in the people, in working together, understanding each other. And that's why we see a move from very informed one to more action-based type of research, having people inside. One of the big challenges of Twente U, and I think also for firms, is for instance the postdoctorate engineer, 2 years program, where people, it's between a master and a PhD you could say, but it's actually someone who addresses problems in practice, work on that, being educated and supervised by people from the university, but working on an assignment in a firm very closely to find a solution for that firm. And you see more and more the PhDs also in that way changing. Most of you, of the PhDs, get subsidies perhaps from NWO or EU or whatever, so sometimes pretty much fundamental based. But nowadays all these institutes are asking for matching money. And why would you invest as a firm if you only hear the results after 4 years? So people want to get engaged. You want to work together. You want to learn from each other. And that's a very challenge. So what's the role of the research in that field? And I think this is also happening that at one hand, both university and scientific practice, we are organized in all kinds of activities. We often have conferences. We meet each other, talks, etc., etc. And this is a great happening that now there are so many people from practice already. But we had these kind of meetings also years ago, and there were perhaps only 10% of practice people were in the audience. Most were just scientific driven. But also practice has their own conferences. And we as an academic, we don't go to these conferences because they are charging you $2,000 just for having a big lunch. We like that. But you're not rewarded as a scientist to go to these conferences. That's not the way we organize it. So bringing people together in practice, not only in this conference, but actually engage and bring people in your firm and firms in the university is very important, because that's the only way to create that kind of engaged scholarship and working together on this field, that you really create a learning-based community of practice. It's a nice word, community of practice, but really try to understand and learn each other. So it's about mutual engagement from both sides, and that's a big challenge because it's difficult to change university as well, but also in industry. And it's about the joint enterprise. And to give you two examples of experiences that I had with these kind of communities of practice, this one is the old basic program, Psibouw. Some of you, I hope many of you, will still remember Psibouw. But if you will do an evaluation, certainly in practice, but also in universities, there were people who will say, this was a great program. And others will say, this was just a waste of money. Yeah? There are different perceptions of these kind of programs as well. But let's don't talk about that. But it was a program with 34 million euros over 5-6 years. So a large program, where we actually tried to stimulate that. And Psibouw started after the parliamentary inquiry, the collusion, the fraud in practice. And this was a network of practice and scientists. But all over the world we see these kind of programs, big programs. If you look at Finland, they have these called shock programs where industry works together with universities, especially Helsinki University, but also some large firms. If you look at Australia, they have these CRC programs. In the UK, they have EPSRC programs, large programs. But also in the Netherlands, we have our TKI's, say the top sectors. We have the EU frames, and etc. What you do see in all these programs is that we discuss for 2-3 years about the program, and nothing happens. And if you look at, I don't know who of you is involved in the European programs, but it's pretty normal to spend 30% of the cost on project management. Nothing has been done yet, right? And in practice, it's very hard actually to engage each other because one is complaining about the waste of money, and that is actually a kind of, you could say, a paper program, a policy program. It's not really bringing things in action, right? So, and this was also the case in Psibouw. We talked for years about the program, and nothing happened. And at the end of Psibouw, there were many, many different projects going on, very interesting projects. But at that time, it was already the end of the program, and it just ended. So many new projects have been launched, but because we were discussing for years about programs, and so many people had a say in it, that it was hard to organize that. So if you look at all these programs, my experience with it is that one of the things is that's very hard to change is that the barriers between practice and academia are very deeply rooted. It's very hard to bring people together, especially on the program level. If you bring industry, say board members of the university and captains of industry together, they will have a nice dinner, nice talks, and they will agree upon the basic lines. But that's just one document saying where we go. But if you try to bring that in practice, that's very hard, and it takes years before something happens. Because people from different parts, practice wants solutions tomorrow, and university people especially, the way we are organized, especially with our PhDs, we often come with solutions after 4 years, right? And that's very deeply rooted. That's the way we are trained, and that has to be changed. Who's taking the lead? It's always debate. With Psibouw, we didn't talk so much about the content of the program. We always fought about who is actually taking the lead. Is that practice? Is that the policymakers, like Rijkswaterstaat? Well, it's an agency. Some people say it's not even a policymaker, but anyway. So who's taking the lead here? Or is academia? And there was always a fight between us, because you also had an audit office, just like if you have with the EU programs. People are auditing you all the time, and they think that they know what's best is for them and for society. Academia think, yeah, but wait a second, we know what's best is for you. And actually between academia, we also are fighting. And then you have the policymakers and industry people. Always this debate about who's taking the lead. But what my experience is with all these programs is that what you really saw that on program level, it was very difficult to engage people. But on project level, where people saw each other day to day, working together, they created a kind of trust. And all the projects that I was involved with, what you actually see that in the beginning, there's a kind of inclination, you could say, to distrust between academia and research. And after a while, if the academic person is involved in the project, practice don't see that, or the practitioners don't see that person any longer as an outsider, because you're part of the team. And trust has developed. That's possible on project level, but you need some time to develop that. And that's very hard on program level to create. So it's stimulating that engagement level. Of course, that program is a kind of iterative process. You have to stimulate collaboration, but again, also on program level, you have to bring academia and practice together, and that they have to understand each other. But the basic idea is about, and the big problem is this, about creating a legitimate authority. What's often, in the university, we often talk about Hirsch index and citation index, and that's how we are evaluated. Practitioners are not really interested in that. And you could say then as practitioners, why don't you appoint then? Because I think every week, someone, a captain of industry who is almost retired, come to the university and said, I'm offering myself for professorship, right? That's happening all the time. And sometimes you think, this is great for the university because this person can talk about lifetime experience, can engage students, great. But if you try to appoint such a person, you also have to deal with your colleagues. And then, not only the board, but also colleagues will say, yeah, but where is his index? Has he published, etc. And you can't sell that. And you could say, this is bullshit. We don't have to take that into account. But that's how you create academic authority, right? And you have to understand that. That's something that even in all the talks that I have with industry people, they don't understand how universities are working. And this is how you are evaluated. And if you don't create that kind of authority, it will be hard that colleagues will like you and that they will give you that legitimate authority, right? So finding that balance is very important, but therefore you have to understand that. And again, I believe, how can you do that if people from the industry are more actively involved in university and vice versa, and create that, because you really have to understand how these different worlds are working together. And programs, most of these programs, if you look at how we are audited and evaluated, is that someone in The Hague or an accountant appointed by the minister is looking at your program and said, look, this is what you have said, where are you now, right? Even if society and demands have changed, you can't explain that. So you have to stick to the things that you originally have said. And that's a challenge because society and practice are changing all the time. And you need that kind of flexibility. And that's important. And I think these are also lessons for a 3D center to create that. And the other story, totally different experience, that I had last year at Stanford, where I was a faculty member. If you look at the website of the civil and environmental engineer, and this is actually a typical example of an American university, I think. Of course, Stanford has a brand. I think they raised last year 1.8 billion in 1 year. So it's a totally different way of organizing that, the cooperation with industry. But they have all kinds of centers. And almost every professor, assistant professor to full professor, has his own center. It's a very much bottom-up process. And to get tenure track, what's very important at American universities is that you create your own identity, your own portfolio. You have to show that you can do it. You have to create a unique portfolio. It's an individual assignment. But since it's a bottom-up process that you have to cooperate with practice, you also need money, because without money, you will not be able to do these kind of studies. So you need to cooperate with industry to really raise your money. And of course, there are funds like National Science Foundation, etc. But it's very much bottom-up driven, very demand-driven, and of course, they have the brand, and that helps as well. But still, most universities in the US, even the lower-ranked universities, are working in this field. One of the big issues is that you get a pluriformity of all kinds of programs. And if someone leaves, then the center also comes to an end. And the question is that, if we would look at it from this standpoint of view, we would say that's a waste of money, because you build up a process, the person retires or go away or whatever, and it drops. Also, another problem was the solidarity between people. Everybody has his own center, and there's a lot of competition, especially between the non-tenure track people. So you build up all these kind of centers. People are even competing with each other, and so on. That's why nowadays, even in these universities, because it's becoming a global competitive world, they also are creating now larger centers. So at one hand, it stimulates the bottom-up process, which is often not the case in our kinds of programs, because we talk for years about the TKEs and et cetera, build up large programs. And here you give kind of individual assignments to people, and you can build up your own center. But they're also creating now these large centers. There's, for instance, Stanford Institute of Environment, which is actually a large center looking at ecology, environment, and climate change. And they get a lot of support because they had to create that kind of program. That was the only way of organizing that support. But what I liked from being there was actually that whole bottom-up process, giving these kinds of incentives, etc. To give you one, not about research, but one single example. I had to teach in the winter quarter. And I actually offered my course in November, 2 months before I started. In all our universities, you have to show already almost 2 years in advance what you will give, let's say, in 2015, right? And there's not so much flexibility. So as an academic, that was great. On the other hand, one of the big problems was, that I find, is how then do you create such an integrated project, and how do you keep people working together, which we find important. So you have to find a balance. At one hand, at one story, a big program, coordinating program level, and the bottom-up process, and stimulating that. So I think these are the 2 major lessons that I want to address. So to come to an end, what actually is important is that it's not just one person who has to take the lead, and one person that is important. It actually takes 2 or even 3, if you look at policymakers, industry people, and scientists. But to work together between different disciplines, integrate the 2 fields between industry and practice, and universities. And you have to work together. If you look at our construction field, and especially structural engineering, and you look at the programs in Europe, there are some programs, but still, it's very hard because we have such a fragmented industry that it's hard to be on the agenda of Europe. If you want to achieve that, the only way we can achieve that is to work together. We need these kind of programs. But also, if we want to support, say, the education and research for our future generations, and also for the economic situation of the construction and civil industry, we need to cooperate in that field. You can't do that yourself. But it's very important to understand each other, and that's why I think it's great to have this kind of meetings to understand each other very much. So that's why I started with saying that although I'm appointed only at the university, I have a small connection with Stanford still for the next 3 years, but not in Delft and Eindhoven. But I feel like a 3TU, because being a 3TU is very important in the end. It's not about the label, where you are from, but we have to cooperate. We have to be complementary to each other and finding a way. And I certainly would invite industry to work with all of us together and to help to build this kind of framework for the future. Thank you very much.